What I heard, the customer just called me and told me what actually happened, and this is really not going to be good for your job. How many conversations have you had over the course of your career that kind of started like that? Two sides of the story, one from the customer, one from your employer, your teammate, and you don't know which one to believe. Better question, what happens when that gets out in the press or in social media? How do you deal with that? That's all about narrative management, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. What happened? Oh, but we're live. I know. We're live. You're so awesome. That's not what I heard. Because the customer just called me and they told me what actually happened on the scene. What happens when you get that phone call and your customer and your employer, your teammate, they have two totally different stories about what just happened? That can be a big problem. But what happens when that story gets out in the press or in social media or on a Yelp review or on Reddit? It can destroy your company. What happens when that story comes back to the office and it becomes the rumor mill and it starts to destroy your team cohesion, morale, your culture? See, that's something you've got to manage as a leader. It's called leading the narrative. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Think storytelling's just for bedtime? Nah, it's the secret sauce for business magic. Stuck in a rut with bland pitches and yawning clients? Enter Boost Your Business with StoryPower. 6 weeks of epic storytelling training. It's like leveling up in a video game, but for your career. Master the art of narrative and watch connections blossom like a viral TikTok. Simple, impactful, and game-changing. Ready to transform your biz vibes? Dive in now and make storytelling your superpower.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at StoryPowerAcademy.com for leadership development and communication skills training.
I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. Some people might call it spin. Some would call it, narrative first aid. But getting ahead of the story, that maybe even reauthoring the story, revisiting all of the elements of the event that happened or the incident that happened. Now, if you've been leading for any period of time, and it doesn't matter the size of your team or the nature of your team, something's going to go wrong because, there's humans involved. Mistakes are made. The wrong button is pushed. The right product is not delivered. The product is delivered, the service is done, everything's finished, and then something fails. Anything can happen to this delicate client service relationship. Now, the question isn't, will something go wrong? It will. The real question is, what are you going to do when it does? How are you going to handle it? See, we have these little challenges that are not just the logistical challenges of delivering the service, whatever that service is. Landscaping, tax services, coaching like I do, helping people get prepared for the stage or prepared for leadership. All of those different things have the same element involved in them that leads to mistakes and errors. Humans. Human error. Bad decisions, poor quality, making a decision too fast. Maybe it's not even the wrong decision, just made at the wrong time. All of these things happen because humans are involved. And all of these things lead to a story. And when that story comes out, who that story is told by, who that story is told to, all of these things have an enormous impact in your business, in your leadership. If the story comes out that everybody on your team is disgruntled, disappointed, they're disengaged, they don't really want to work for you. Now, if you're a mid-level manager or you're a tiered manager and there are people above you, it only takes so many of those stories kind of walking around the rumor mill before your opportunity to lead and manage is stripped away and somebody else gets the job. Now, the sad truth is there are times that some people will intentionally start the rumor mill with a story, accurate or otherwise. Maybe you've heard the phrase guilt by accusation. It's really big these days. It's what leads to people being canceled on social media. They say a phrase or two and they think it was funny. And nobody else thinks it was funny. But all of a sudden it gets blown way out of proportion. I mean, just the evolution of the changes of our society and culture, of what's acceptable and what's not, is mind-boggling. We got in an elevator yesterday, not even 24 hours from this moment. We got into an elevator, and it was one of those where there were a lot of people going from the 19th floor back to the ground floor. And we were like, I think we can all fit. We all got in the elevator. It stopped on like the 13th floor, and we're like, who's getting off on the third? Nobody was getting off on the 13th floor. Somebody wanted to get on. And it was two young ladies, and we were like, I think we can make room. And they looked, and they didn't see my wife in the back. They just saw an elevator full of dudes, and they're like, no, thank you. I get it. I think I would have made the same choice. And then some genius in the elevator, an older dude older than me, says, don't worry, we're not all gropers. Who even says something like that? Who even thinks like that? How wildly inappropriate. Now, if someone in that elevator knew that person's name, knew the nature of their business, and thought that'd be a funny thing to put on social media and call them out, that could be the end of their career. That could be the end of their business. Because you can get all kinds of harassment charges just for making a statement like that. But it didn't end there. It went downhill from there. Listen, these simple little conversations, these simple little quips and quotes, these funny little things that one says, you might think they're harmless. And to you, perhaps they are. But to other people, the beginning of a story, a Reddit thread. I mean, it made this podcast. I'm not going to say who it was or talk about them or their business, other than to say it was a wildly inappropriate comment. And someone in leadership should have a conversation with that individual and go, hold up, you can't say things like that in public. You can't say things like that, especially to a couple of young ladies. But how often does that kind of thing happen? When you think you got support of the crowd, when you think everybody's on your side. See, here's what happens though. You get one person who wants your job, and they take an incident like that, and they begin to look for every other time that you've said something that's just kind of marginal, and they blow it out of proportion. And then they take it to the boss, or they take it to HR, or they take it to Reddit, or they take it to some other form of social media, and they start talking about this thing until it becomes a full-blown PR disaster. Maybe not for the organization, but for the individual. Now, if that gets out of control, that individual has that problem and the company's done nothing about it, now that story has become a brand narrative. Well, nobody wants a brand narrative like that, but it can happen. Have you ever heard a phrase like, well, you know, people at work there do X, Y, Z? You like to think that's positive, that they're saying nice things about your company. Everybody that works there is gracious. Everyone that works there is considerate. Everyone that works there is punctual. Everyone that works there is conscientious. That's exactly what I want to hear about my team. But that's usually not what happens. And if you're not careful, the "it's my pleasure" kind of conversation vanishes. And the "we're not all gropers" kind of conversation gets accelerated. And some yahoo thinks that's funny. Some yahoo thinks that's a great idea. And if it offends you, get over it. But it's not just an individual. It becomes a little bit of your culture. It becomes an expanded version of your brand. And now your consumers, your customers, your partners, your collaborators, they begin to either get caught up in the rumor creep. This story is just creeping around everywhere, and it's taking on legs of its own, and it's like the game of telephone, it never stays where it started, right? It always gets morphed into something way different. Well, I heard he said, and then he did, and then also, and then none of that happened, but it's what happens when the rumor mill gets out of control. As a leader, you've got to not only get out ahead of that, but you've got to begin the process immediately of considering the narrative that's there, true or otherwise, and meeting it head on. Now again, the media might call this spin. It's how you take the facts of an event and you speak to those facts, or you speak to what happened in a way that's more encouraging than destructive. It might be not an incident like that specifically, but I was speaking at the same event that I was with. I was speaking in a conversation with someone, and they're like, so tell me what you do with StoryPower. And I said, well, tell me what you do for a business, and I'll give you a valid demonstration, if you will, of how it might apply to your business. And the individual I was talking to said, well, we do lawn irrigation, we do landscaping, installing sprinkler systems, rerouting them, that kind of thing. I said, okay, so I'm going to give you a fully fictitious, completely made up story just to demonstrate how StoryPower would apply to a business service crisis type of an event. He said, okay, hit me with it. I said, I had a big event just recently, showed up with all my cameras to load into this fundraiser in a multi-million-dollar home. And as I back into the driveway, I realized there's a fountain coming from the front yard that's just drenching my car. And I'm a little bit concerned about taking all my camera gear out of the back of the car and getting wet. It wasn't rain, it was one sprinkler head that had become a fountain. And the property owner, the homeowner that was hosting this fundraiser says, man, I've done everything I can. I've called the irrigation company that put this system in. They told me that the shutoff valve was installed between the main city water system and the irrigation, but on the other side of the irrigation system is my pool pump. And so if I shut off the water to prevent the fountain, I also shut off the water that runs the pump in my pool. Okay, that was a bad decision. That was not good engineering. It also wasn't good engineering for the caterer to drive off the edge of the driveway and run over a sprinkler head. It probably wasn't good engineering to put a sprinkler head within 6 inches of the driveway. That's just not good planning. So there have been a whole lot of mistakes that have been made. The question now is, if you own that company, what do you say to that customer? How do you, if that was a competitor, how do you, as a possible solution to that, speak to that event? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, I'm really not even sure. I said, now, let's step aside for a second and let's think about what if your boss got that same phone call. And it wasn't your team that did it, but his number was handy because, maybe your truck was in the neighborhood fixing Joe's landscaping down the street. And so the neighbor said, well, I saw the truck. I'm going to call this number. And he calls. And at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, your boss says, hey, I'm on the way to a soccer game, but let me see if I can get somebody else to take the kids to soccer, and I'll be right there and fix the problem. Now, what if that was the story that your boss tells at the next staff meeting? Yeah, I got a call on Saturday from a new customer. We have a project now. We have to go out to this place in this very ritzy neighborhood and pull up all of the irrigation system that was installed because they did a poor job of doing it. They didn't engineer it properly, and they made it not a successful install. We're going to uninstall what they've done, or at least make some corrections to it. I've already been out there on Saturday, solved a problem, got the guy back online, and it was all good. But he now trusts us to make a major change. It's going to cost several $1,000s, but we're going to do this. And so I need you guys to go out there and take good care of him. When the boss starts that story with Saturday at 3 o'clock on my way to a soccer game, I rerouted my day to take care of a new customer. What do you think the conversation is like among the rest of the team, who's saying, Well, I'm glad you didn't call me on Saturday, or I was already working on Saturday, but I was in another part of town. Right? The way they perceive their boss, their leader, has a little bit of a different view to it already. And that story carried by the sales team into other potential customer conversations to say, yeah, let me tell you what happened last Saturday. Our boss got a call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Apparently a caterer ran over somebody's sprinkler head and it was flooding their yard. And the team that put it in wouldn't even respond to the phone call. He happened to have our boss's phone number, called him. The boss dropped what he was doing and whatever and fixed it. Now we're doing a complete install. Look, if we can trust our boss like that, you can trust our team like that. We're going to take care of you no matter what. We're going to do the right thing no matter what. All right, see, that sounds like just a story. It sounds like just a sales pitch. It is, and it's more than that. It's like narrative first aid. This is the kind of story that comes in behind a crisis and says, we can fix that. We can go one step ahead of that. We can go above and beyond fixing that. We'll actually do it when it's inconvenient to us. We'll do it when it's an expense to us, because in the end, we want the customer to be happy, even if they weren't our customer originally. That's how we convert them to our customer. It's that thought process that sets behind the decision that was made. All right, the first question you have to ask from a core values standpoint, from a business first standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, what are the odds on a scale of 1 to 10 that the boss would have taken the phone call on a Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock? I don't know that answer. Well, what are the odds the boss would have said to his wife, hey, take the kids to soccer, I'll join you as soon as I can. I've got to go take care of this crisis for a customer that's not even ours, a problem we didn't create, a design we didn't do. But they called me, they asked me, I'm going to help them. Is that the kind of person that runs your company? Is that the kind of person that shaves your face and brushes your teeth? See, this is so much more than the marketing statement, the sales pitch, the client close conversation. It's so much more than that. This narrative starts with the people on your team. Are they the type that would have a conversation? It's another conversation that I brought up with this guy. He said, I don't want to do virtual classes for my team, but we definitely need some leadership conversation in our organization. We got about 35 people and we run into some really odd challenges. And I said, well, how much of your team is bilingual? He said, probably 30%. I said, how many of them are Spanish only speaking? He said, probably a different 30%. I said, so you got English speaking, Spanish speaking, and then both. And he said, yeah, that's a pretty good mix of our team. I said, so what happens when two of the guys that only speak Spanish are on the work site and they presume that nobody understands what they're saying, but they start bickering? And I'm not saying this is happening in your workplace. I'm just saying the potential of it is high, and I've seen it happen in other places. They start a conversation thinking nobody understands what we're saying. But the conversation they're having is, our boss is so cheap, our boss is so lazy, he won't show up on time, he doesn't do any of the work, he just sits on the truck and yells at everybody else. See, that conversation seems like it's just two people having a conversation. But think back to the fast food counter and how many times you've encountered that. You're like, I just want to get my drink, but they're in the middle of a heated debate over tennis shoes. That customer reflection of that conversation, I mean, what if they did speak Spanish or Ukrainian or whatever other language that you think they can't hear, and they actually understand what you're saying, and now they react to what you're saying? Now what? What happens when that gets back to the boss? Better question. What happens when that customer takes that to social media? I had some guys out doing some work the other day. They were doing blah, 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 whatever it was, whatever kind of work it was. But they were constantly trash talking the boss and the company and their integrity and the way they get paid. And man, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to put my money in the hands of a company that's going to mistreat its employees. I'm not for that. See, all of a sudden you've got an opinionated reaction to a story that it should have never been told, should have never been heard. Now, as a leader, what do you do with that? Again, got to have a little narrative crisis management. You've got a moment, you've got an incident, you've got something that happened that shouldn't have happened. But it's humans, so it's inevitable. Something like this is gonna happen. If you have a strategy in place, if you have already preempted some of these conversations, if you have an open door policy, not just stated in documentation, but that you practice and you exercise, where employees, team members, other leaders can honestly bring their opinion forward, and the only consequence is that we're going to truly look at this problem and see if we can solve it. This doesn't go against your employment record. This is not a problem for you in your future. This is, hey, thanks for identifying that. Let's fix it. Again, this is not just, this is in our documentation, this is in our HR policy, this is the way we say we operate. It's got to be the character of your leadership team. If the character of your leadership team wouldn't take that 3 o'clock Saturday call and rearrange their schedule to make sure they can accommodate a potential new customer, don't put it in your marketing material. That's not a brand promise. That's a lie. Don't sell what you're not going to deliver on. And understand that this is not just about the boss. While it starts there, it's not just about the leader or the owner of the company. While it starts there, this culture thing permeates every level. If you don't have an answering system that somebody's going to get the call in the middle of a day on a Saturday, even if you're closed for business on Saturdays, if there's not an answering service or an answering machine that's at least going to pick that up so you can decide is it urgent or not, rather than just ring through for half an hour and nobody answered at all, then don't make that promise. Don't tell that story to your customer if there's no chance you can back it up. If you don't have the people on your team that are actually going to fulfill on that promise, don't make the promise. Don't tell the story if there's no substance behind it. Don't tell your team from a culture standpoint, we got your back. We have an open door policy. Come tell us if you have a grievance. If something isn't going your way, if you feel like you've been mistreated, or if you have a better idea, please come let us know. It just doesn't happen. I also yesterday heard someone give a very brilliant, very brief presentation on boundaries and priorities and finding your core values and sticking to them, and how do you manage your time based on these priorities. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's the Pareto principle, right? 80% of what you do benefits like zero. 20% of what you do really moves the needle in your life. The challenge for most leaders, especially solopreneurs and small business owners, is figuring out which 20% it is. If you've decided what those 20% are, the top 2 out of the 10 things that you have to do before lunch, the top 20 out of the 100 you have to do before the end of the week. If you know what those are, and you can delegate the 80%, or just let it go because it's on your task list, but it doesn't make any difference, you need to make that decision. But if you're not making that decision, and yet you've got your culture, your team, your brand, your consumer convinced that you're an extremely efficient company, you've got an internal conflict problem. If you say you've got an open door policy, but you still have employees who have a grievance, you have an internal conflict problem. You have an internal leadership problem. You can't delegate an integrity problem. Can't be done. I remember early in my John Maxwell journey, hearing him say, if you look at all the things that you do in life and you realize that with all the effort you could possibly muster, you can move the needle 2 points, maybe 1.5, but 2 points is kind of the top, which means if whatever the thing is, you're a 4 or 5, maybe a 6, and you push it 2 points, now you're a 6, a 7, or maybe an 8, which means you're just above average. If you're a 7 or an 8 or a 9 now and you can push it 2 points, you can be a 9, a 10, or an 11. If you're a 9 or a 10 or like right at the top of your game and you push that as hard as you can, you could be the Michael Jordan of, the Tiger Woods of, whatever that is in your life. But if you're a 1, 2, or a 3, you need to delegate that to somebody else. And when I heard him say that, I thought, okay, that just makes good sense. If the best I can do is give it all I've got and be just above average, why would I work so hard just to be above average? Why don't I focus on the things that I'm already a 7, 8, or a 9 at, that I can push them and be the best in the world at? And then I heard him say, you need to focus on these things that are going to push you to the next level and forget about or delegate the things that you're not so good at. And for a season in my understanding, I conflated that concept with people who have character flaws. You know what your strengths are. I'm good at communication. I'm not so good at giving the grace to people when their standards don't meet my own. I have the standard of excellence. I know what I'm capable of. I know what I perform at. And sometimes I don't give the grace for other people who don't know what I know, haven't done what I've done, don't have the level of skill or expertise that I have, but I expect them to perform at the same level. And so working on that grace, working on that, I'm going to give them the task and then I'm going to get out of the way. See, this was part of the conversation yesterday. She said, sometimes I realize taking the time to train somebody to do my job takes longer to train them than to just do it myself. True story. Yep. And it's real easy when you've done it so long that you're just naturally good at it. You can do it so much faster and so much more efficient and with the standard of excellence that meets all of your expectations. And then you hand it off to somebody else and you have to retrain them. It seems like 500 times before they get the first basic part of it right, and it's still not excellent. It's just done. And you're thinking to yourself, why did I delegate? I could have just held on to it and done it myself. And as I conflated these things, the character flaw of not having grace for the people on my team versus understanding what my skills and talents were and pushing those as hard as I could, when I conflated those two together, what became obvious is what I see a lot of other leaders do. They don't delegate the tasks that somebody else could do better. They try to delegate their character flaws. That, my friends, is a mess. When you have the inability to do your task, you can up-level your skills. You can get some more training. You can even hand off those tasks to somebody else. But when you have a failure to meet the basic necessities of being a good human, you can't delegate that. You got to work on that yourself. When you've got weaknesses of character, weaknesses of integrity, if, for an example, you said our company is the kind of company that the boss will drop what he's doing on Saturday at 3 o'clock and come take care of your crisis, but you know full well that if you got that phone call, the first thing you're going to do is call somebody else. Maybe somebody on your team, maybe it's going to roll downhill until you find the closest technician that can possibly solve the problem. Maybe you answer the phone and go, it's Saturday, I'm playing golf today. Sorry, can't help you. If that's the truth about you and your operation, no judgment, that's fine. But don't tell people otherwise. Because now you've created a brand narrative that's deception. You're making a promise you have no intention of keeping. In a relationship, we'd call that catfishing. In business, that's the beginning of the end. You might get away with it maybe a handful of times. But if you've got people on your team that you're not managing, if you've got people on your team that don't know the narrative of your team, meaning how to tell the story of the core values you actually live by, you're going to run into some problems. And if you wait until that crisis happens, you're definitely going to run into a problem. Listen, one of the things we do here at StoryPower is we help people understand that the story you're telling is so much more than an opportunity to get on stage. It's so much more than an elevator pitch. It's so much more than just being able to close the sale in the moment. It is all of those things. It's all of those things. How do I speak on a panel in front of 350 people? What do I say about my company in a podcast interview? How do I explain our core values when we onboard a new team? All of those, StoryPower is a huge advantage when you understand where to find the story that matters, how to craft that story in a way that's going to make a difference in somebody's life, how to connect that in a relevant way to the people that you're talking to, and how to incorporate it into the overall narrative of your brand, your culture, your marketing. and your customer-facing conversations. When you can put all that together, you have mastered the communications in your leadership level. And until you have mastered the communications in your leadership level, we can help. We can help you as an individual. We can help you as a leadership team. We can help your team. And if you'll take a chance, jump into StoryPower Academy and take a look at some of the stuff we've got going on. Next Tuesday, we start our next 6 weeks to StoryPower course. That will rock your world. I'm telling you, you're going to hear things about story. This is not just a sob story. This is not your trauma story per se. Some people, actually, that's the story they want to tell. That's the story they need to tell. That's the story that's going to be transformation. But if you're in leadership, if you're in sales, if you're in management, if you're customer facing, knowing how to tell a good story is going to change your life. And you really ought to take a look at it. I challenge you, go to StoryPowerAcademy.com and just check out the 6 weeks to boost your business. You're going to find it's going to make a huge difference in the who that you are. And as Myron Golden always says, you got to be before you can do, before you can have. You want to see your company go to the next level? To have that level of success, you've got to do something differently. And to do something differently, you've got to be someone different. And all that starts with the story you're telling in the mirror and in the media. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. There is a retreat coming up that I want you to know about. It's called the StoryPower Academy Retreat. This StoryPower Retreat is about focusing on your communication skills, taking them to the next level. Discover, develop, draft, deploy, and deliver some of the best stories you've ever learned. You're going to listen, create, connect, relax, and reflect around this beautiful lake scene in Granbury, Texas. It's a chance to rejuvenate and refresh and start over with some of the best training you can possibly imagine around storytelling, leadership, and communication. Join us, get away, and relax.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at StoryPowerAcademy.com for leadership